Joining us now is Jacob Siegal. He is a senior editor at Tablet Magazine and is the author of a fascinating new piece. Let's go and put it up there on the screen. It's a guide to understanding the hoax of the century, 13 ways of looking at disinformation. It's an important rundown both on the history of the disinformation wars, but also kind of the architecture of the disinformation industrial complex that exists today. Jacob, thank you so much for joining the show. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So it's a very long piece, but I do recommend that people go and read it. Give us first the genesis of why you decided to write this and some of the most shocking things that you were able to uncover and kind of string together for people.
Well, I started working on it a few years ago, so it's been a long time in the making. And the origins really were in what appeared to be the mass manufacture of narratives in the United States. And just being an American and being a spectator and observing the way in which there was both this production of these pseudo events, to borrow a phrase coined by Daniel Boorstin, things like, for instance, the Russian bounty story from Afghanistan, which you may recall, which was just an entirely false story, obviously political narrative that was planted in the press. So observing that on the one hand and observing on the other hand, this new regime of censorship that was capable of purging from the public record, things that were not simply controversial, but also things that were vital, for instance, about, health issues around COVID and the pandemic, or for that matter, around the 2020 election and Hunter Biden's laptops. So it was this machinery that had become more and more overt in American life. And seeing these two things, the production of these pseudo events and mass narratives on the one hand, and then on the other hand, the mass censorship that was taking place, and recognizing that they were two sides of the same coin, that was the genesis of the piece.
So take us back to the roots of the current misinformation moment, because I feel like it sort of gets glossed over now, but I remember quite vividly the whole Red Scare, Kremlin stooge discourse was used obviously against Trump and Trump supporters, but it was also used to try to quell the populist uprising of the Bernie Sanders movement. Anybody, Bernie was seen as like doing Russia's bidding. Anybody who supported Bernie was called like a Kremlin stooge and all of these sorts of things. So what happens that enables that discourse to be turned into this entire sort of like industrial ecosystem?
Yeah, that's right. It was virtually identical language used with the two sort of populist insurgencies on left and right. Bernie on the left, obviously Trump on the right. And the proximate origins of this are in military and defense establishment theories around what's called hybrid warfare. And this really starts in 2014 with the invasion of Crimea and also the Euromaidan movement in Ukraine, which the US backs and Russia opposes. And the popularization of this idea of hybrid warfare, which essentially posits that there is a new form of warfare, also sometimes, lumped in with fourth generational warfare, in which conventional and unconventional tactics are mixed together in a kind of larger information space, globalized information space, enabled obviously by the internet. And so Russia is seen as utilizing this method of warfare, not only to pursue immediate tactical aims, but also to demoralize target populations, to seduce fellow travelers in the West and even in some Eastern European countries, as it were. And so this idea of hybrid warfare, which has some legitimacy, has some basis in terms of new tactics, new operational techniques being employed in warfare, has some legitimacy in terms of the kind of ways in which the internet opens up this new space for propaganda and for information operations. very quickly, and from the beginning, as early as 2014, 2015, there are people who are pointing to the kind of capaciousness of this concept, the amorphousness of it, the ways in which it can be used to mean anything. And in particular, there are Eastern European security officials pointing to it and saying, hey, this excessive focus on hybrid warfare is actually taking away from the real sort of
Right.
beans and bullets aspects of war that matter, and turning it into this sort of abstract, vague political concept. So that's there from the beginning. And some of those same critical U.S. in particular, though it's also NATO people involved, intelligence, defense, counterterrorism officials who are talking about hybrid warfare, then begin to talk about, in the context of the 2015 sort of emergence of the Trump presidential campaign, and then really in 2016 it picks up. They begin to talk about the Trump campaign and the Bernie Sanders campaign as extensions of hybrid warfare, essentially, and they're pointing to memes that are being spread online and saying, and in particular, there's a former FBI officer named Clint Watts, who becomes a prominent counterterrorism official, later reemerges in relation to Hamilton 68, the Russian influence detecting dashboard online. But before that, before Hamilton 68, Watts is one of the key people who is pushing this idea that, as he says explicitly in a piece for the Daily Beast where I used to work, he says that basically that Trumpkins, as he calls them, and Russian trolls have become more or less indistinguishable.
Yeah, I think all of this is so important in terms of the history because it sets the stage also for state action. So, can you describe where governments begin to get involved? They begin to start funding this stuff, and it gets laundered both through government to non governmental agencies and then gets perpetrated as fact and repeated by journalists. It's like two sides of the same coin.
That's right. The key event there occurs in December of 2016 with it's actually the authorization for the 2017 NDAA, which is the Defense Authorization Bill. There is a bill that's a part of that called the Countering Foreign Disinformation and Propaganda Act that gets signed into law by President Obama in December of 2016, and really is the first major piece of law and policy authorization that creates the architecture for this, what is effectively an information operation that is nominally aimed at defending against foreign threats, but is always from its inception, because of what I just pointed out, because of this blurring that you get from the proponents of hybrid warfare theory and people like Clint Watts, who are blurring the lines between Russian trolls, Russian influence operations, and American political actors. Even though this is nominally directed against foreign disinformation threats, it's always, in fact, really sort of omnidirectional. And in practice, it's really directed against domestic political actors in the United States. You get the creation of the Global Engagement Center in the State Department, which becomes the central governmental hub for coordinating and leading these counter disinformation experts. And then the GEC, in its own mandate and its own mission statements, is talking from the beginning about leading a whole of society effort that will involve bringing together actors from the tech industry, actors from the NGO sphere, basically all of the most influential and powerful sectors of American society in terms of controlling the kind of messaging apparatus on the one hand and the communication structure on the other hand. So that's all baked in from the very beginning.
Mm.
Well, I think what's really important about the piece is, the media piece is the most apparent. It's sort of at the surface. It's what we see. We've certainly talked about the media role here, but you kind of dive a level deeper at all of the architecture that has been constructed that is, deeply troubling, I think, no matter where you are in the political spectrum to our civil liberties. So, Jacob, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.